So for those that are just coming in, hi, my name is Sophia Prater. I am the host of OUX Happy Hour and the chief evangelist for object-oriented UX. Today, we are talking to Allie Ofisher. Allie is a certified OOUX strategist. She leads UX at a company called Pixo out of Urbana-Champaign, Illinois. I just think, I don't know, is it Urbana-Champaign? Is it always Urbana-Champaign?
Yeah, well, our company's in Urbana, but technically it's like Urbana-Champaign's where the University of Illinois campus is, and it's like directly in the middle of those two. So it's, it's the same to us.
And your industrial design degree is from Urbana-Champaign, it's from the University of Illinois, right? Yes. Yep. So we both share an industrial design degree, mine from Georgia Tech. So we bonded over that early on. We also bonded over Allie's amazing project in the certification program where she did an app for cat behavior. So we both really love cats. So we're cat people, we're industrial design people, we're OOUXers. So I'm very, very excited to hear from Allie. She has been leading her clients through these ORCA Sprints and finding some success with it. And she's going to share how it's going, what's working, what's not working. And I'm very excited to do some Q&A too as well. We've got Marsha here, who's actually in an ORCA Sprint with me. So I have done one ORCA Sprint right now with Marsha, and Allie has done more than me now. So I'm very excited to learn from Allie. Cool. All right. So I'm going to go ahead, Allie, and hand it over to you, and let's hear about ORCA Sprints.
Awesome. Okay. Let me share my screen. All right. There we go. Are you seeing a screen that says running ORCA Sprints?
Yes, ma'am.
Because the last time I presented, I was not, I never started a share screen. That was the problem with it. I never started a share screen, and I just started. I just went going. So
you're so excited.
Yeah, truly. So yes, just to piggyback on that, of that introduction, I work at a company called Pixo, as Sophia mentioned. I've been there about 7 years, and that's really where I grew my UX skill set. So I've been there a long time. And today, really, my focus is more around the facilitating those like juicy conversations with clients and mapping the information architectures of systems. But my past experience was a lot of visual design. So I'm always utilizing that part of my visual brain, thinking through systems, creating models and diagrams. But a little bit more about Pixo. So Pixo is a women-owned company. We're in Urbana, Illinois here. And we've actually been a company for more than 20 years. We build from like well-researched websites and apps and software. We're really we focus on just custom solutions for the most part. We work in industries like higher ed and ag, manufacturing, nonprofit, governments, a lot of things that are known in the Midwest, since that's where we're at, especially. So, and as you can imagine, OOUX was just a huge game changer for me. So I got certified in 2021 and have been using it ever since. A lot of sprinkling it into different client projects. Luckily, I juggle about 3 projects at a time, so totally different domains and areas. So it's fun to be able to sprinkle it in. I'm kind of curious how many people work at consultancy. Maybe you can throw in the chat if you are in a type agency consultancy type scenario. Feel free to just call out in the chat. I'll be looking over. I'm kind of curious how many people there are in that. So I do want to give a quick overview of just what an ORCA Sprint is if you're not familiar with it. So you can also find, I want to throw out there, I think it's episode 33, Sophia, on your podcast goes into like the full detail.
Yes, the last episode. It's not really the last episode. We will be restarting the podcast soon. We just had a lot going on, but yes, it's the most recent one, which is from a few months ago. But yes, 33.
33, yes. So that's the one that will go into like a lot of details, the brainchild of the sprint. And so essentially it's taking that ORCA process and bringing it down to 1 week, right, with the full project team. And this is a play on Google's, if anyone's familiar with Google's design sprint, and Sophia goes into it a little bit more. Because if I remember, Sophia, you were reading that book, right? Or you knew there was like a
Oh,
comparison between
yes.
those.
Yes. I was
Yeah.
reading Jake Knapp's book and I was like, this is so awesome. The amount of structure that goes into it. And then was thinking, oh, we already have a very structured process. How could I kind of like shove the ORCA process into a similar framework?
Yes. So I clung to really that idea after Sophia shared it. The concept of doing this relatively quickly was really, really intriguing for me and my work. And really because I wanted to share a little bit about the types of projects we have at Pixo. So really it's a mix of these like complex content websites used to convey a lot of information and interact with audiences. And then we have this other ambiguous, I have this blob over here that's just custom web database applications, software, hardware, integrated interfaces. That whole umbrella, that's like my wheelhouse. I love that area of just like unknown things, systems, complexities, tools. And we have a really strong content strategist team, and they have like a solid discovery process for those informational content heavy websites. And the discovery process for the projects I really enjoy, we really didn't have anything that was at least like replicable. I would just kind of make it up as we go all the time. And so I really just felt like, okay, after being certified, I can see ORCA being the way we do discovery for those like larger system, gnarly, knotted up websites or, tools. And so I started to bring it to existing projects, flirting with activities like noun foraging or doing like we would document content types or something we would document in an object map. So I started to bring in like an object map a little bit at a time. Anyway, and but when I wanted to do the whole process, I'd estimate it out and it'd be like a couple months long. It was really hard to find. I mean, that was a hefty price tag. And it was really hard to find the right client that's going to want to pay for that to redo something and spend a lot of time, at least from what we're the types of clients we're working with. I knew I needed to start a little smaller. So when I saw that, I was like itching to try a sprint out because I'm like, we could do that. That's something I can involve in how we already work with our team. So I'm also really heavily involved in our sales and approach process. So I had the opportunity to pitch this approach to 2 clients back to back. And so what I'm going to share today is really an overview of those 2 client systems and my experience with those sprints. Since they were back to back, it was really great. I got to like quickly change some things and try it again right off the bat. It's been a couple months now since those, but I've already got, I was telling Sophia this morning, I've already got hopefully another one to start with for like a discovery of a new system. So I'm excited for that. Okay, I'm going to share about, I can't get into details about what these client systems were because of NDAs. So I'm going to just paint a little bit of a picture just to give you an idea of what they were. But really what I'm going to focus on next is just about the sprint and how I went about conducting them. So it's really not relevant exactly what those systems did. So this first one, the first sprint I did, this client really had an idea of, they were in a philanthropy organization. So they had an idea for a system that could really disrupt how philanthropic organizations find donors, which is really important. And the tool would visually map relationships between things like people and organizations. And if you know about OOUX, you know that it's all about mapping relationships between things. So this got really meta, like really quickly. We were like, wait a minute, we're mapping the relationship about relationships. That in itself was a little like wild. But they came to us with a list of use cases and they knew exactly what they wanted it to do, but they had no idea how it would look like or how to interact between the things and how you would like use this map or where you get from A to B. Like that structure was not clear in any way. So to me, the light bulb went off. Okay, an ORCA Sprint would be a good fit because one, their timeline was extremely short. So they had about 3 months to get a beta version created. And the second was it was complicated enough that we needed to better understand how the pieces together. So just because they had a list of use cases, we didn't know like how would you get from A to B? How is this organized? And we needed to understand how those pieces fit together so they could create the database of it. Okay. ORCA Sprint number 2. So this one this was a system that was very, very outdated. It was becoming difficult for this organization to maintain and fit their business needs. It pretty much was a system that it powered their day to day. So it had multiple locations for one. It was used to print like things like receipts, track sales, print checks. A lot of their finances were tied up into it, but they definitely needed to stay custom. So it wasn't like they were going to look at something off the shelf. There were too many unique things they needed to do. So in my mind, why this was a good fit was the unknowns were very high. Like I could not, even with a small, like trying to understand the system, we needed to dive deep and I did not have, like I needed more time to do that. So and the client also didn't know how everything worked. So that was also like something we were all learning. We also struggled to get an estimate or even a way to scope it because it's so large and so outdated. The current version was broken in a lot of ways. So it's like we knew we had to reinvent it. It wasn't just like a recreate it type of thing. We needed to rethink just how it worked in general to fit their needs now. When it was built 20 years ago, it wasn't. Things have changed. Band-aids were added onto it. The other big piece is budget accuracy was a priority. You could think about this if you're not in a consulting, like to me, hours, time, like we've got to build that and we have to usually scope that out prior to get a contract. But if you're an internal, it's the same thing about time. Like how long is that going to take? What's do you have that time frame for a team to work on something like that? So it was a big priority for us to understand that so they could budget it for 2 or 3 years. I don't know, however long it might take to actually redo their whole system. Okay. So the question going into these sprints that we had was, I wanted to know if they could help us quickly gain domain knowledge, right? If they could scope a multi-phase project. So can this, 1 week sprint help us do that? Can it support estimating future work? And can it include the full team efficiently? So this is the thing with consulting, you charge hourly. Having 5 people in a room gets expensive very, very quickly. So we had to be conscious of that. So we had to see how efficient we could be with it. Okay, so now I'm going to just share what I learned from those 2 sprints with those very 2 different systems, things that went well, that I'll do again, things that I've learned and will avoid in the future. And hopefully if you're thinking of doing an ORCA sprint yourself, like what you can kind of take away from it. So the general structure of this, and this how Sophia laid this out in your original outline of a sprint, it's built on these 3 things. So there's an introduction. You introduce what you're going to be focused on. It's always one of the pillars. So object, relationship, calls to action, or attributes. And that's always at the start of the day, because you have to remember people are going to be people that don't know what OOUX or ORCA is. They have no context for the most part, especially when we work with clients outside. They're not used to this process at all. So you have to do a little introduction. The activity round, so this yellow piece here, this is really the meat of a lot of the work sessions. These were like the longest pieces for us. And it is really going into like you're working together. I did all these remote, I should note, but you could do them ideally, you could do them in person. And yeah, that would be like you're getting out all the post-it notes, you're sketching, you're thinking through the stuff, asking all the juicy questions. And then the last, what we tried to end with was this survivor to prioritize what comes out of each activity. And that's what you lead with the next day. And it's building on it, everything. If anyone has also any questions, thank you, Sophia, for jumping in. I know you might need some context for OOUX and ORCA. So if you need to jump in, Sophia, please do for any of these.
Yeah, and definitely everybody put your questions in the chat and I can any ones that I can go ahead and field. I'll go ahead and answer those, or I'll capture them for you, Allie. So we can, when you do Q&A at the end, I'm monitoring the chat. You can focus on the presentation and I'll gather questions.
Awesome. Okay. So first I want to talk about sprint length, because this was a big one for us. So traditionally, and I'd love to hear, Sophia, you spent, I think, a week on yours. You'd want to spend a week on it, ending with sketching on Friday. But when it came down to scheduling and timing for my team, we balanced, like I said, multiple client projects and our clients with their own priorities. 1 week just wasn't possible. We couldn't make it work. So we just pivoted. With the help of my project manager, we were able to carve out about 4 hours a day, usually in the morning or afternoon, so we could like chunk them all together. that was really, really helpful. So this means that we ended up doing each of the pillar for 2 days. So half day sessions and split them up 2 days. And both of the sprints were run this way. And some of them, like, we wouldn't start on Monday, we'd start on Wednesday. You know, you just had to make it work. So I guess if anything, like having it be perfect, it's not going to be, is what I found. Like, you gotta just kind of pivot with schedules and whatever you can fit in. I will note the other big thing is that I intentionally left sketching. I gave myself a whole week after that. I did not try to fit it into one day. So this, when we talk about sketching, it means like actually taking the object map and creating a prototype, creating something you could get feedback on and test, those wireframe type things. The thing is I wanted to make sure I could give an accurate estimate of what those would, how long those would take. So we just left it for after the sprint. And that was also important, I found, because we ended up and I'll share this in a little bit, how we prioritized those. Like, we focused on kind of when I was actually sketching, I didn't sketch out the whole system, all the objects. We actually focused on like a chunk of them at a time, because we knew those would come way later. So we knew the first version of this is going to be, you know, just these objects, of course. So I didn't know how many objects those would be from the start. So it was great to give myself a whole week flexibility there to do that. Okay, and then the other thing I noticed, and I'll see if this is still a pattern when I do more, but the first week was really like we were on key, we were on step. The second week, things just needed to change. Like, we would go through calls to action and be like, wait, we need this object or attributes, and be like, actually, it's this. And so then we would, you know, come back and say, okay, let's go revisit that map and add that here. So if anything, I learned, it's a suggestion in the process, but it's not, you don't have to follow it to a T. I would definitely suggest at least scheduling a blank day, because we sure needed it. We probably could use so many more days, but at least having that day scheduled, because when it ended up happening is that we didn't have that, and we'd have to wait for another week because everyone's schedule's filled up to meet again. So if you're scheduling things, add a buffer day. People would love to get that time back if you don't use it. So it's just really helpful just to have when you need to have more conversations. Or sometimes we bring users in, especially for that internal tool for a company. We could bring users in and do some quick like research or like get some questions answered that we had. So we pivoted a lot that second week. Okay, so I used, so Sophia had this Notion board that helped organize what each day is. Made a copy of it, and I made this version because I said we were splitting days. This became like our Notion hub for scheduling. It was really great. It was used, at first I just used it to set up meetings and figure out timing, but I'll share a little bit of how I used it to actually document things, our sessions, and that was really helpful for our client that wanted to reference things later on after we weren't working with them. So one thing I just wanted to share, so after each of these, I definitely got some feedback from our teams and talked to our clients too and got some feedback. And even switching to half days, we all felt the effects of such a dense and long workshop. So I just want to like share that it is a big weight. Like, there's a lot you're gonna feel that. I mean, like with any workshop, if you're doing and trying to condense it down to 1 week, it is going to be a lot. So expect for that. The benefit, though, we all agreed, even though they were dense, the momentum was amazing, and we made so much more progress in that 1 week than we did ever, you know, trying to do this kind of like a little bit at a time over a couple of months. So that was really, really cool to see that was helpful. This is also just interesting. So this product owner was a real rock star. So she could easily prioritize, make critical decisions. She knew the complex details of the data really well, which was awesome, but it was really hard to keep up with from a documentation standpoint. So I loved talking to her after and hearing that even for her, this was really fast. It's someone that was like, when I started working with her, I was like, whoa, she moves fast. And she's like, this process moved very quickly, which was just be prepared. I guess what I'm saying is like, be prepared for that. That's the best, and like set those expectations for it. Okay, so I'm going to jump into a little bit about facilitation. This was vital to the success of these. Time was limited, so you had to be super efficient and set expectations. So I have a few tips for that. Spell out the biggest thing. I did this on the second sprint, not the first one. And the second one was with just this larger group of our internal team. I just spelled out really clearly in a slide what I expected from everyone. And so then our clients could also see why, okay, you're putting 6 people in a room. Why are they all here? What are they all doing? So if it's from having a QA analyst, like they were helping us document from like a BDD, like feature file standpoint, our developers were helping us see how we could simplify the system. We just like talked as a team before and put those together and then shared that. And that was just, I think, really helpful to again remind everyone, what is my focus on in here? Because it is a big group. It's a big group of people. And I did that same for the client roles too. Just what they don't know what they're jumping into. Another way is I just reiterated how people could help me, since this was really, the first sprint, I was the one juggling, facilitating, note taking, documenting, question asking. So I changed this and I was like, okay, everyone, I need your help with these 3 things. So jump in with questions, help document, and be thinking of simplification. Give them something tangible to just be focusing on. And I think that was really successful. I saw the difference in the second sprint, and that was really cool. Okay, I'm going to jump into activities. So the next tip are specific for some of the activities that happen. So there's that yellow middle section and how I formatted them. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, not following each, ORCA. The first 2 are actually for relationships. So this is a little, Sophia, I went against what we should do. This system had almost 20 objects in it. It was huge. It was gigantic. Somehow we made it through them.
Yes, I was going to ask you, that was one of my questions with how many objects did you tackle? So you tackled 20. We did 13 at Autodesk in our nested object matrix. Marsha, I think, took a day and a half for the nested object matrix.
Sounds right.
But yeah, like do the math, 13 by 13. I can't even do math that big.
No,
that's big.
no.
That's big, difficult math. But I think it's 12 by 12 is 144, right? I think I remember that from 4th grade. So that's, do the math on how many intersections that is. So 20 by 20 is how many intersections?
Yeah.
Somebody 400 intersections.
It was too many. And you know what? Honestly, like we had to just focus on the main ones. And a lot of it was because we had like parent-child or bases or different things that like were built off of these parent objects. So we just like, it just how we broke it up. And we didn't even figure that out in this relationship piece yet. So like a lot of it was just needing to focus in. I found like, so the relationship spaghetti, those diagrams were just too hard for our brains, like to figure out for this, like when we tried to even just 3 at a time. So what I did, and I would do this again, is just starting with 1 and going through it for all of them, and doing 1. And obviously I don't have that huge map here that we had, but that was just focusing the conversation in everyone's mind until you can get to like the next one seemed to be really helpful. We could take a breath at least a little bit. The other thing I found was prioritizing relationships were really hard to do as well. For someone that's not used to, wait, what does that relationship mean? How do I prioritize? What am I losing was the big question. Like, wait, what does that mean if I deprioritize that relationship? So what I did is I just sketched out a wireframe of what it could look like prior to us meeting. So I would say, okay, this is what a location would show up on this page and have these 3, like it would be a little module, a little component that would show those locations. So you could click on one or something and go. That was so helpful. Like the power of visualizing things at this stage, even though we're not visualizing them, I still refer back to like, you need to sketch it out. And to do like that quickly, it was necessary. And I would definitely do that again. Okay, this was kind of cool. This happened just organically. So we were starting with attributes. So say we have a person object and we were coming up with, okay, what are all the things we need to have that are describe that person? What are the metadata? What's the core content? So we brainstorm them all over here. Then we to prioritize them, I just said, okay, let's move into this box over here, all the ones that we think are really, really relevant for this system. What are we going to have? And then we move them a third time into these ones need sort and filter by. And what that told me was that we probably need that on the card view. If you can sort and filter by, you want to be able to see it. Then we also, this is kind of weird, we didn't just have a card, we had a node view. It's like a smaller version of a card. And so we had to figure out what's on that versus what's on the card versus what's on the detail page later. Long story is just to say that it was really helpful in the moment to take these things and go through that in one step. So I didn't save Survivor for later. I just did it all at once. So we can all be focused on that one object, make those decisions, and then move on. It was hard for us to like jump back and forth between them. So it was nice just to keep that conversation going. Okay, documentation. So for us, this was like the critical piece to the sprint success. So we needed to see if we could use what we learned and document it to effectively in the future estimate and make a backlog and refine those in sessions later on when we're building out things. So this was like a real test of its success. And the first sprint I used multiple Miro boards for work sessions. And I also created an object map in Miro, along with Google Sheets and Airtable. Everything was spread out. And so the feedback was from our stakeholder was just, this was really hard to find stuff. There was one good thing, like they really liked, and I'll show it in a second. I can't remember if this quote says it, but a piece that was a recap every day about what happened. But even with that, links got lost. My team would honestly ask me all the time, like, wait, what Miro is that in? So I made changes moving forward. And so I want to share just a couple of those that really helped with documenting, or at least things I wouldn't do again. Like just if you don't do these, great. But the first benefit one was, so this is just an example of a base camp. Every day after a session, I would share, okay, today we did this, and this is why. Mostly because we had stakeholders that couldn't attend the meetings, but she wanted to keep up to date. So this was what she could use to send out. It said like, this is why we need to think in objects. This is the important here. This is why definitions consistently are important. Here's what we did, and this is what to expect tomorrow, so that people that did want to come could join in. She said herself, she's like, I loved these. So that's to me something, it took a while to do that after a long day, I'll be honest, like doing a daily recap, but I know hearing that it was helpful, I'm like, okay, I'll do that again. The other thing is centralizing things in Notion. So since then, I've started to, since that Notion Sprint Hub that like Sophia had and shared, the one I was using, I ended up just consolidating. Instead of sending that base camper an email, I would just go into that activity. So if we're doing object consolidation, I would check off what we did that day and then add in afterwards links and some like screenshots. So then it's all in one spot. So from moving forward, that's how I would document it and then share them a link with that, so that if they ever wanted to go back, they could see what we did, when we did it, and what that outcome was. Oh yeah, I forgot I did these. Okay, so I would also keep notes from my introduction. So those intro slides, that first intro day, I kept these in that hub. I put those there so that if anyone missed it, they could just go and reference. So here's an example of like the intro, I think the intro to objects. It has like all my notes and I could just reference these and now I just reuse it. So next sprint, like I can reuse this and reference it, or if someone else at our company is doing a sprint, like they can just reference these. So reusing things was really, really cool and helpful to get set up like that if you're thinking of doing multiple. Okay, so as I mentioned, that first one, I had multiple Miro boards. They looked nice. I thought it was the greatest thing ever, and so organized, and it backfired. They were just too complicated. So, try to centralize. So now I had, the second one, I did just one single Miro board. Everything is in it. My fear was that people would get lost in the Miro. It didn't matter. Like they just wanted to know. I mean, they still would. So I was kind of a solution for that, but at least if they needed to, they knew it's just at this one link. So that's definitely something, if you aren't already doing, like do that, it'll help. I also, the first one, used Miro as an object map by request from the client, and I quickly became very frustrated by it. It has some of the features. It's great for the quick sketching it out, but I really needed the power of sorting and filtering that Notion offered later on, so we could add estimates and use like organize it by phases. Like I just wanted to filter and just see the beta version or the MVP version of it, and so definitely Miro doesn't have that. I wish I knew that because now I'm not going to translate that object map into Notion. So she's stuck with it in Miro right now. And that's fine. Of course, she could, if she's going to keep using it, do that. But I would start one in something like Notion next time. So here's just an example of that Notion object map. What is nice is that all of the decisions. So what I started to do on the second one is everything when we were done each day, I started that object map early. Didn't mean I shared it with them, but I started filling it out so that once we were done, we could reference it. And this has been, so my teams didn't know what an object map was. They never used one. A lot of our engineers never used one. So it was really cool to see that the engineers that were in the sprint with me actually had to switch teams. We had like a little staffing change and new ones came on. They only had this object map. They weren't part of the sprint. And it was so cool to witness and see how they could quickly pick it up and understand. It was awesome. And they were said like, oh yeah, I reference it all the time. And I was like, oh, my heart sings. It's like documentation that isn't going to go, die in some, I don't know, graveyard. It's so cool. So I'm so glad that it worked for them and they reference it. And we're using it all the time. So really cool to see. Start early because it is a lot to start documenting, especially if it's a 20 object system. Okay, the other thing to centralize, the theme you're going to see here is centralization. I've done the CTA matrix on the left here in a spreadsheet. I've just moved that fully over to the object map. I have the whys and whens just as text there, and I just use tags for phase and object roles. It works really well for us. Like we can get that information in some one spot. I might come across some things later on that are going to be tricky, but so far I liked having that there. And I see my note. I wanted to remember. I don't know if you did this, Sophia, but I didn't use this. I didn't do the user story activity in my sprint timing wise. But one of the big things was
we did not have time for that.
No.
Nope.
No, and it was really cool. So we have a QA specialist who's really focused on creating these feature files, which is essentially user scenarios and writing these. So it captures all the different scenarios that we need to test for. And they did this. They've been helping me do that. They went through the ORCA Sprint with and are now writing these they're more feature centric, so not like object centered, but it's really cool. And I'm thinking we're going to start combining that in some crazy way. I'm not sure how, but we'll see what comes out of that. It's really cool. Okay. The last piece I'm going to share, I have check time there, estimation. So the final test of our ORCA Sprint was its potential for helping us estimate each phase. For future development work. So again, like even if you're not in a consultancy, you still need a kind of a time around, well, how long will this take to develop? We wanted to see if the object map could help us do that. So the thing we tried with, and time will tell, we're not all the way through this project yet, but we added estimates. So a generic number for every instance of a object or every instance of a core content piece or an attribute. So as you can see here, I can kind of zoom in a little bit. We had that estimate. So like every relationship, this nested object is 10. Every object, I just used the barn guide. This is for a system with barns, is 20, 20 hours or something. And we just guessed and played around with this and started to get a sense of, as you can see here, the sum was over 1,000 technically hours it could be for that system. And pro tip, a great way to do this is if you're thinking about doing that, you can set up templates of those pieces of those attributes, like what those are beforehand. And when I create a piece, so say I'm adding something new to the system, I already have in here, it's going to be an hour and it'll just autofill that. I can get into it a little more if people are interested in that. But it was really great for like now if I start a new object map, it'll be in there and we can tweak that estimate number and to make sure it makes sense, based on what we learn after this one, if it really is that hour amount. Okay. So this piece, when we needed to decide where to start, it was really helpful to actually, so I didn't use as much of the prioritizations through the sprint, like those survivor activities, as much as maybe we could have. It was really hard because the client was like, well, we need all of this to be a successful system. It's hard for them to phase it or second it. So what we actually did is we made some decisions for them based on dependencies. And this was actually conversations after the ORCA Sprint. We like looked at all the objects, how they were related, and made a plan for, okay, this is phase 1, this is phase 2, this is phase 3, and that's what's going to make up the whole MVP because it was so large. And then we would focus on that. And so this was just really helpful. And I would do this again, like again, just figuring out the order of operations that we're going to build it out, even though it's all under the MVP. And what that got me thinking about is how I want to utilize ORCA sprints later on. So we had our main ORCA sprint. It was like the big one to figure out, okay, like why, let's go wide and understand what are all the objects. And now, like right now we're in phase 1, we're almost finished with phase 1 of building it out. And again, like the MVP is actually the full piece that's going to be usable that we can actually test. And that is going to be like if they just got phase 1, it wouldn't really be a finished product for them to use, but we could test those pages and those objects and that relationships. And as we got lower, like the things in phase 3, we punted, like we're like, let's figure that out later. We're brain dead. So what I'm thinking is I'm going to build in a mini ORCA sprint focused on whatever those objects that we put in that phase 3 bucket so that we can really pull them up and like get into the weeds with those. So that being said, because we had so many and we couldn't get to them, I think what we're going to need to do is like have a mini one, which I'm pretty excited about, like what that would look like. What's the mini, it's like, the full system. So just diving into a couple objects and kind of focusing on those requirements for them. Okay, I'm going to end on this quote. This is just a testament to the power of this process of ORCA and how helpful it's been for people to visualize systems. So this is from one of our stakeholders. Thank you, Sophia, for changing how I do my job. Nothing is better than seeing that you can help someone figure out a problem or go from that original list of messy user cases to an actual structured system. And so it's really exciting. And I definitely felt that even from our team and everyone we worked with, which was really, really cool. All right, so let's jump into some questions. Yeah.
Yay! Thank you so much, Allie. Y'all put some gibberish in the chat if you want to applaud. This is how I like to applaud, is just to put some. Okay, so we have one question from the chat, but y'all put more questions in the chat. I have like 16 questions now. So this is basically where I now interview Allie. And I also just kind of wanted to bring up some parallels from my experience in running the ORCA Sprint with Autodesk and kind of how that went. Marcia, feel free to hop in if you want. Cool. Yes, that was so cool to see. And definitely for y'all that have questions, even if they're like basic OOUX questions, if you are new to OOUX and you're like, wait a second, what is the why and the when from CTAs? That's totally fine. So a couple of things that I just wanted to bring up, like we did not get to sketching either. We did not include sketching. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe that's not something that belongs in the ORCA Sprint. Or it might be like an audience to audience basis, but like with talking with Autodesk, it was like, we actually did it in person, which was amazing. So we had like 12, 13 people locked in a room for an entire week, which was a glorious thing. But it was like, we didn't want to, I guess, like spend that time doing the sketching. It was more like, let's just figure this stuff out as much as possible. So we spent about a day and a half on the nested object matrix, the 13 by 13 nested object matrix. And then we kind of like spilled in and we basically spent actually some more time on Friday doing extra prioritization because I mean, Autodesk legit has like 200 objects. Like it's So that was the other question on how many we had to like the whole prioritizing and figuring out. So in the course, when I teach consolidation, the way that I talk about it, and I need to kind of update this, is like you're consolidating what are the objects in the system. And really the other lens of that is not just what are the objects in the system, but what are the objects that you're tackling for your particular purposes? Like what are the objects that we want to tackle for this particular workshop, which was a big challenge, you know, with an object with 20 or 200 objects. You can't, it's really tough to tackle that. It sounds like you did tackle all 20. If there was 30, you know, you wouldn't have been able to do it, right? You would have to say which of those 30 or which of these 200 do we actually focus on in this week. And there's like kind of an art and a science to that too. And like, I feel like I'm curious on how, so did you just decide with those 20 objects, did you focus on some of them more than others is my question.
Oh yeah. Some of them we just didn't even get to. Like, honestly, like we roughed them in. We're like, okay, this is like, it's in the object map, but the details aren't there. We didn't dive, we just like pinned it. We're like, okay. And we knew it would come later because again, like we wanted to make sure we could, like, again, a big piece for us was trying to understand and estimate, like understand it. So we kept kind of fighting with that of like, we want to understand everything so we can get an accurate, understand what the budget would be to rebuild this, but we can't go deep. So we like just roughed it in a little bit and wrote a definition and said, let's come back to it, and put some of those attributes under it and the relationships when they were really clear, but then we would just be like, okay, we'll get to that later. And so.
Yeah. And how did you decide like did that just kind of emerge naturally on which ones you ended up focusing on? Was it like, and I guess like the dichotomy that I'm looking for is like, did you kind of like cluster your objects? Like, oh, these are all really highly related, so let's just focus on those. Or was it like, let's pick like representation objects and kind of smatter the objects across the system?
Yeah, it was more so like, again, we went back to the dependencies of, okay, these objects are like the base core of the system. Like these touch everything. So let's start with those. And like, so like, for example, in this system, this is a system that works with clients. They have clients that they pay bills to. So clients was a big piece. We needed to start with that. Yes. And it came down to like, what do we need? What touches the most? Let's start with those. And we'd even just rough in a couple, like in the database, like we just have started with a few of those like attributes, like what's the name and it needs an ID and we'll add on to that later. So that's kind of how we broke up. I mean, how you would phase it out. And it just naturally we had a chunk. We're like, okay, these three, let's start with these three. And we'll get to these 4 later. And then we'll get to these 5 later.
That's so funny. So like what touches the most, like you could actually start seeing it. We started seeing it in the nested object matrix. We were like, oh, this object is connected to everything. And then this object here is only like connected to 2 other things. Like it's kind of like a little like appendage object, right? And so you want to like, if you do like a rough cut of the nested object matrix or even like a little, and we skipped system modeling too. We did like 5 minutes of system modeling and then we're like, let's just go to the nested object matrix. But you can start seeing like the objects that are highly connected, that have the most stuff in their nested object matrix column are the ones that you really want to focus on. And we did the same thing where we kind of like picked, it ended up being like a little bit of a smattering. So of the like 200 plus objects that we could have tackled, it was those 13 like naturally rose up to the top. Okay. So we've got some questions in the chat. I'm not going to be so greedy. So David did have a question on the hours estimate. Is that for dev or design or both?
Ooh, all of the above. So we did combine. So actually we had a separate sheet where we're like, okay, how many hours? So like if we had a relationship and truly we were guessing, we're like, how long would a dev take to do a relationship? And we like, okay, how long would design take to create this component type thing? Okay, so then we had front end, back end, we had design, we had QA, like we always added QA testing to it. And we just took that total number and we're like, okay, that's about 10. And I think we upped it. Maybe it came out as like 7.5 for one. And then we, rounded it to 10. Now, again, we had, it like the first, I wonder if I have it here. The beta, even the beta was like 700. So like the hours were still a lot. What we did to like double check that we weren't being absolutely crazy, like we estimated how we normally would so that we could actually get a sense of if we were close or not. So again, like we use this as more of not like our primary tool until we can learn more, see the numbers or understand it better. But so we just kind of played around with those. So like I said, an attribute was one, it was always one, but if you have 15 attributes for one object, like that's not going to actually take an hour for each, field. It could, I guess, for some of if they're really complex or have a lot of API anyway. So depending on where they're coming from,
Yeah, some of it's like just add the drop down. It's like user generated, and some is like, oh, we have to build an entire like where are we going to suck this data in from? Cool, awesome. So some more question from Courtney: do you give the clients homework before the sprint?
Ooh, I did. Not before the sprint, but during the week we had a lot. Like I made them go back in and add definitions to the objects. Like, hey, go and refine these. I'm trying to think. They like the first sprint I did. The client knew a lot about the database, so she had to give us a lot of details about like these. She already had the database figured out and knew a lot of what the content was. So she would like kind of funnel that, or like I was like, okay, you better start prioritizing that because we're gonna get into the weeds of that tomorrow. So definitely, if you can do that, that's best. I would recommend it. I don't know if you did, Sophia.
I gave them like a little bit of like basics on OOUX. Like it was like the first podcast, I think for the first two podcast episodes, a couple articles. So I gave them like a little bit like the getting started playlist. I gave them that to like prime them a little bit. I was lucky enough also that we had 4 other folks that had gone to the self-paced masterclass in there. So we had a lot of OOUXers, but we definitely did have some stakeholders. We had salespeople in there, which was actually amazing. Like people that had been selling at Autodesk and using Autodesk for like 13, 20 years or something like that. So they had so much subject matter expertise and really understood what the clients wanted, but they knew nothing about OOUX. And I don't think that they did the homework, and that's fine. They're busy people. So there was no homework. They just had to fly there and show up, other than like maybe listen to a podcast episode. I think ideally they shouldn't need to. I did homework though. So I pre-noun foraged.
So I did that too. Yeah. That we didn't. Yeah.
I budgeted in 10 hours of noun foraging for an incredibly complex system. But even with those like 10 hours of noun foraging, like I was listening to podcast episodes on mechanical engineering. I was listening to like watching tutorial videos on Autodesk, and like the homework that they did have to give me was some fodder for my noun foraging. That was the homework. So they did a really good job of organizing that like into a SharePoint folder and even prioritizing it, because they were like, some of this is like, you're not going to be able to get to. So Yoko, shout out to Yoko, did a great job of being like, here's the stuff like we really want you to go over and noun forage from. And here's like, if you have time, get to this stuff. About 10 hours of noun foraging before going in. And there are some little system models, little baby system models in the sidebar, right? Like trying to connect the things, little three object system models. Okay, got some more questions. So Elena's asking, hi Elena, how did it go with your team not being familiar with ORCA going into the sprint? Any tips on that?
Yeah. Are you thinking team like the personal team like that I work with at Pixo? Yeah. I definitely gave a kickoff with them before. Like I had to just get like, hey, like before we met with our clients and started that kickoff. They've been hearing about it. Like luckily I've been sprinkling it in. Again, they didn't go through the whole process, and they've always been a little bit like, what is Allie doing over there? So I think it was helpful though that I've been talking about it and they've seen it. They just haven't seen the whole piece all put together. Would I do anything? I bet like if I was working with a different team, I didn't really see a problem with it. Like during the sprint, like we all figured it out and they just kind of trusted and we're like, okay, throw me into whatever you want, like kind of thing. And afterwards they connected the dots and they were like, okay, I get it now. I get how this works. And I think that was fine. I don't know if I would change anything like walk through what it was. Yeah.
I think when we like learn OUX, sometimes it's like, oh, it feels like it's so different. It feels like it's a lot, but sometimes getting people on board, let's something for like a collaborative session like that isn't as heavy as it might feel like it would be. Especially folks like, I mean, people that have never worked this way before, people that aren't even product people, like in the subject matter experts, the sales folks, they didn't have any problem with it. It was, as long as you're guiding somebody through, I would say it's interesting, the ratio. So for me, like I was facilitating, I did have 4 other folks on the client side who'd been through the self-paced masterclass. So they knew the language, knew their stuff, but they still were on the client side. And it looks like you had about 8 people in the digital room. Yeah. And it was myself and I think about 12 other folks. And I think any more than 12 would have been too cumbersome. I think you maybe could do more in person than remotely. Actually, like it feels like that's maybe like counterintuitive, but in person, you can see everybody's body language. You can see, like, you can just kind of sense a little bit more than, I feel like I don't know, it could go either way, but anything more than that, I think would get really unwieldy. Okay. There's so many other good questions here. We're just going to keep going. All right. So if anybody has a hard stop, Allie, do you have a hard stop? Can we go an extra 5 minutes? Okay, cool.
Oh, absolutely.
So if anybody else is a meeting, West Coast folks that are like still on the clock, we are coming up to the hour, but we're going to keep going to get to these questions. Okay. Andrew, don't know anything about ORCA. When do you recommend using this versus a design sprint? Oh, such a good question. Are there certain projects that are better suited for ORCA? I'll answer that second question real quick. No. Did you say yes and I said no at the same time?
What? Oh, no, I agree with you. I don't think, yeah.
I think that like, if it has any level of complexity, I recommend, I used to teach a course on OOUXing your UX portfolio, like, which should be a relatively simple site. Like anything that has any level of complexity, the only thing that I would say would not use OOUX/ORCA, OOUX being the philosophy, ORCA being the process, is it's very, very tool-based. Like if you're designing a new compass on the phone or something like that really is just like the interaction, or like a calculator or something like that, I probably would not, like, it is the object, right? So you don't have all these objects that are highly connected with each other, that have instantiation. Like anything that has instantiation and like saved data that's probably in some sort of database, you're going to want to, ORCA is going to be a really great process to help you figure that out. But yeah, if you're like designing a new calculator tool, like calculator app on the iPhone, or maybe even like Find My iPhone or something like that. Like if it's very, very micro, then OUX might not make sense because you don't have saved instances of stuff. But the question for you, Allie, when do you recommend using this versus a design sprint? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'd go off of, I remember what you were talking about of doing this before a design sprint. Like this is a piece of figuring it out. Like, what is this? How is this going to like map and work? What's the back end? What is the architecture of it? And then doing a design sprint on a piece of it is how I think about it. But I honestly haven't done a design sprint in a very long time. So I forgot, like it truly, like that's just to me thinking about like you want to get the architecture down before you're designing it. Is how I think. Like, could you go into a design sprint right after? I don't know. How were you thinking about it?
I was thinking the opposite. I was thinking that you would do the design sprint first until they'd be like, what are we actually building? Like I do feel like ORCA is a garbage in, garbage out process. Like you can make a really great architecture for something that nobody wants.
I see.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
So but I think that you could do it both. I think it could work both ways, where you do the design sprint to be like, is this even valuable? Like, do people even want this thing? Get that basic idea of what's going to happen, and then go, and you could actually noun forage potentially from the output of the Google, the traditional Google, just nothing's traditional in our industry, the quintessential design sprint. And then potentially take a piece of that, like one of your CTAs, right? Like it turns into this, like one of the higher level object-oriented user stories, like, create new recipe or something like that on a recipe site. And then think about like all the ways that could shake down, and do like a smaller design sprint on one of those CTAs. But yeah, I feel like the validation piece, like the main value of a Google Design Sprint is like, it's getting to that prototype and testing something to be like, is this something that even like, do people even want this thing? And then you can get all the architecture right through the ORCA Sprint.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now that you say it that way, yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely.
Andrew, do you have, if you're still here, do you have any follow-up questions or any thoughts on that, especially if you've run some design sprints?
Nope. I think I don't really follow the Google Venture Sprint anymore, but AJ and Smart, who works with Jake Knapp, they kind of simplified it and made it a lot more approachable. And I like the way that they do it. And they have a lot of great videos on YouTube.
Yes, they do. Oh, their videos are so good. I'm so jealous of their videos. They're so funny too. I love them. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I need to check up on what they've been doing more recently because I've just read the book and I think I've watched like a couple of their older videos. I think they did move it to a 4-day, right? Is it at 4-day now? Andrew, isn't it? I think they like condensed it a bit. Cool. Yeah. But I would love to hear anybody else's thoughts, like, especially if you run an ORCA sprint and you run a design sprint, and like how they could hook together. I should probably, when we reboot the podcast, have Jake Knapp on the podcast and have him talk about it. Okay. So David K, CTA to user story to feature. Do you have any ways to map ORCA to agile sprint planning? Which actually that was going to be like what you were going to talk about originally.
Yes. So, and the reason I didn't want to talk about it was just because we do sometimes, I mean, I don't know how traditional Pixo is with agile, like how we're running it. We're really, I mean, we get to be really flexible, so we're not really strict about it. But what I have learned is that we have been creating like feature user stories again for the system that are separate. They are kind of based off of the CTA, but they're more like all encompassing of it. So it's like multiple CTAs are that become the feature, like manage a client. Again, I'll use that example, like manage it in the system, being able to add it, being able to edit it, like all of like just the CRUD stuff, but then I don't know, other things. It's like building out all those pages that relate to it. So that then turns into that feature is then what we pick up for a sprint or something like that. And we've been using objects as epics. So, you know, let's focus on these 3 epics for, or three objects, and then phase that too. And then, yeah, those features then, you know, what are the tasks to get that feature done? So I do think there is a connection between the CTA and like the traditional user story of it. I would love to see like someone that's more familiar with like the true agile and Scrum method, like how they might approach that with this.
Yeah, David, do you have any thoughts? Like, has that been working for how it's been working for you?
I've run 2 projects so far, and just trying to stick object map with sprint planning in Agile. I use that's the exact, you know, where I actually arrived at is object as epics, but I do track like a few more epic, like backend object or backend as just another epic that we need to catch in, and like maybe redesigns as another thing. It's been really tough because it's like trying to map like, oh, they're using CTA or feature, but we're using objects. How does that even map? And I hate it before where, you know, we're very feature based and we don't think about the system as a whole. I love how object oriented it does think about the whole system as a whole and try to bring it together.
Yeah. So I mean, like, I've been thinking that, and you know, being separated from not being internal at a company or doing a whole lot of consulting in the last year or so, is that like you would have your like high level epic, and then I love the epic, you know, an object being an epic, but I was thinking like, or even like a user journey, like you have like this user journey or like really high level, even like an outcome. Samuel Kulik talks about super outcomes. Like what is like this like big outcome that you're hoping that the user can get out of this? And then breaking that down maybe into like sub user journeys that can get them to that outcome. And that would be an input into the ORCA process. That like, that would that's what kind of work would happen before. And you would sort of be like, okay, so what are the things that we need to make that reality for that person, right? And usually those objects are just going to be mentioned, right? You can do it could be another input for the noun foraging. And then getting down to like, okay, now we know like, what are the objects and then what do people need to do to those objects that is going to ladder back up, like, because when we go to the why do they want to do that? It should kind of go back to one of those main super outcomes that somebody actually wants. So mapping the why of a CTA to the outcome, right? I mean, even to like down to your attribute level as you're prioritizing your attributes, like, well, I mean, being able to filter and sort by these pieces of metadata is going to help with that outcome. And then those CTAs, once you have the why and the when, creating those like object-oriented micro user stories. So like a developer can be like, yes, I can go and I can like build this thing right now. Cool. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it could work. David, you have another question with a lot of text in it. Do you just want to, you're in the hot seat right now. What was your second question? So I don't have to read it.
Yeah. So like, do you have a way to sort out before you start the project? Like what Sophia just said, like if it's like a calculator, like you try not to, there's like, is there a way to like sense what the project is before you kind of dive in, before you start this whole process? I've had problem where people ask me to start this kind of ideating. I probably don't take within one sprint, I'll take longer with longer sessions, but and it turns out to be a dashboard, which doesn't have any real actions, are just like ways to like kind of push out data. And I find that out a week later. I just want to make sure that, is there a way to sense that out early?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just share that when each time before when they came to us with these ideas, like to see if this actually would work, I would just start sketching out, okay, what are some of the nouns and what are those relationships on the side, and get an idea. And then I'm like, okay, if this is really big and gnarly, then I know we'll probably need a longer, like now I would think like, okay, maybe let's do a longer sprint or something. Or if it's a really small, like recently we just had one that's about, like, I think I can find about 5 objects. And I think I can already, based on how they described it, the relationships, I'm like, okay, this would be a good use case for like what we'd want to do. Like this would make sense to go down that path of doing the sprint with it. So I just try to like jump into the process prior to I tell anyone like that I'm doing it, just to test it out. Does that kind of answer? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do the same thing too. It's like, I do like the pre-work is basically like a quick and dirty sprint, basically. Like I usually go just the O and the R, right? Like I'm not, or like when I'm noun foraging, and we probably all know like noun foraging is like, you're basically like foraging. You're like grammar foraging. So I've got my pink and I always thought they were here, my pink and my blue and my yellow and my green highlighters. And I got everything printed out. So I'm highlighting all of that stuff. So I'm really focusing on the nouns, but I'm also like, oh, that's an attribute right there. That's a little bit of core content right there. There's a CTA right there. So I'm literally just color coding and I'm getting a kind of a good grasp on what's going to happen. And I just feel as long as I'm like one step ahead of my client or the folks that I'm trying to help out, then I feel pretty good about it. I mean, that's true for those that are in cohort 7. I think we got a couple people here in cohort 7. Like, as you know, with the design challenges, I'm just staying one step ahead of the design challenges. I haven't fully figured them out. And I think that's all good, and often then I'll get totally surprised too. So I'm not like tied to any outcome, right? Be very zen about it because, you might get some monkey wrenches thrown at you. Okay, let's do, Jen is asking about resources, any available templates for the intro presentation for ORCA. I'm going to answer that real quick for Jen. I would say create your own. I don't think that there's any we do in the self-paced masterclass, you get all the slides as PDFs and you're welcome to use, might even say email me if you want to just have the keynotes. That said, I do think putting it into your own words is really valuable, and just trying to piece together. So putting it into your own language is really helpful. So Allie's nodding her head. Okay, cool. Yeah. Richard, I think we know the answer to this question. How have the actual development times matched with the estimates? That's still TBD, right, Allie?
Yeah, definitely TBD. And that's something, I'm going to have to like our project managers were really going to go and look back at the data after we log everything and see. So we won't really know for a while. But we have a sense of, again, like what we're burning, but being able to understand like, well, wait, how many objects and how many calls to actions and how many, like what did we actually get done there? That's what I really am excited to go and map. So yes, I would love to share once we actually, like, if there's anything great, did that work or not? Is kind of the question we have.
Okay, last question, and then we'll wrap up. We've epically gone 10 minutes over, which we're usually so good at keeping this to an hour. But this has just been so juicy. All right. So Jen is asking, curious for more details on your experiences selling and doing an ORCA Sprint, working on making the case. Yay, good. And finding it challenging, because our stakeholders are unfamiliar with the outputs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. I actually found success in explaining not so much the details of like what, like you're going to get an object map and you're going to get this. It's like, no, what is the real thing? Like you're going to understand the structure of your system. You're going to be able to start this in a way that makes sense. Like focusing on those, I really left out. And I think that was what like the problem was when I was trying to do it as a big month. I put in like, we are going to do these sessions and these things. And it was like, what? Like, what is this thing? So just being able to more say like, well, yeah, what are you going to understand? Like luckily we just had a lot of trust in the two people that did, that we signed up for. I don't think in our estimates or in our contracts, we even said like, we're going to do this thing. We left it as like, we're going to help you get to this outcome. And this is how we do it. This is just how we do that and how we get there. And that's what you're getting from us. I think that is really powerful. I know it sounds more simple, like you're not kind of going into the weeds, but something about going into the weeds for someone that doesn't know, at least so far. I don't know, Sophia, do you have any kind of thoughts on it?
I'm just nodding my head over here. I'll just like parrot back what you said is like, you got to go to that wider context. Like nobody thinks that they need an object map. Like nobody even does. An object map is just a means to an end. It's just it's a way of documenting. That said, some people do like their documents and their deliverables, right? Like, I mean, how many wireframes are we going to get? I want 67 wireframes because that's what we paid for. Like I've seen SOWs like that before. So I think as much as possible as you can frame it as if we are going to be designing this thing, don't you want us to fully understand it? And that is a very hard question for a client to say no to. Say, no, I don't really care about you understanding it. I just want you to design the thing. So if you like kind of reverse that and basically make them say like, yes, of course we want you to understand it. And that this is a tool for understanding. This is a tool for us to all get on the same page. Getting a shared language so that we can communicate better is another like, a nice, I think, a really kind of, what's the word? Attractive thing to say, because I think we've all been in the position of miscommunication between whether it's client and consultant or design and business, or design and technology, business and technology. We've all been there where miscommunication has created a whole lot of rework. So that we're trying to get a shared language. We're trying to be all singing from the same sheet of music. And then another thing, just is like for OOUX in general, is you can also remove the bottleneck for design, because when you have devs in that session and you create that structure, if you can think of the object map as really something that accelerates development, because developers can go ahead and start working from that object map while designers are working on the front end. You can kind of fork and collaborate on that structure and kind of not go your separate ways. Of course, you're going to be in constant communication, but then you can kind of like go into your wheelhouse and do those things based on that object map that has been approved and worked up, collaborated on with the client. So less surprises later on, less rework, and, getting the developer started earlier, faster.
Yeah. I will say I definitely had to sell getting it was like I mentioned in that it was pricey to have the six people on our end in that whole long, like that was a hefty, usually discovery, it's like two of us or something that were doing it. But then we saw, and so it was just an experiment. Luckily Pixel let me experiment. I was like, okay, it's going to cost this much. I think we actually didn't charge maybe I don't remember. We figured it out because we knew it was going to be an experiment. And then we saw like, okay, no, this was valuable to have everyone there. And this is why, they could get started like that, or they understood it quicker. And then, we could just get going so much faster. So it was worth it for us.
Heck yeah. I think it'll be worth it for everybody. Awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to wrap it up here. Thank you. Thank you all for staying. We got a few people still here staying late. Allie, thank you so much. So interesting. And happy OOUXing, everybody. Y'all have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye.